The security breach I will be talking about today is one that took place in 2018. The social networking service, Facebook, were involved in a data breach that resulted in the harvesting of more than 50 million Facebook users' personal data. This attack was conducted by Cambridge Analytica, a political data firm, by leveraging a vulnerability in Facebook's Open Graph API. Facebook is a large social networking website. It was founded in 2004 by a group of Harvard college students, one of which is their current CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. From its infancy, Facebook has been a company surrounded in privacy issues. In 2006, Facebook's then new newsfeed feature would share everything that user did to their friends, liking a song, a change in a relationship status, or even adding or removing a friend. Anything and everything was automatically shared. This sparked quite a bit of controversy from users, as not all users wanted to share every detail to their friends. Just 1 year later, Facebook launched a project named Beacon. In essence, this project was intended to revolutionize advertising by sharing purchases made by users on external websites to their Facebook friends. However, instead of making it a selectable feature, friends were automatically notified without necessarily receiving user consent. Needless to say, Facebook is far from the perfect networking service. For context on Facebook around the time of this attack, 2018, Facebook's estimated active monthly users was somewhere at the magnitude of more than 2 billion users. Interestingly, but unsurprisingly, Facebook was already under the close watch of the public eye. They had been accused of using their website to spread Russian propaganda and fake news to users. Cambridge Analytica, as I mentioned, is a political data firm headquartered in London. Despite being an independent firm, the organization had an interesting relationship with the US Republican Party. Robert Mercer is known to be a big spender when it comes to politics, having donated more than $30 million to Republican political campaigns since 2006. Mercer was also a principal investor for Cambridge Analytica. Steve Bannon, who you may recognize as the White House chief strategist and senior counselor to the president during the Trump administration, though this was very short lived, was a prominent member of Cambridge Analytica, even serving on the board. Now, while in almost all media outlets, Cambridge Analytica is described as the perpetrator of this data breach, the real attack was launched by a man named Alexander Kogan. Kogan is a psychologist from the University of Cambridge. He was also a director of Global Science Research, a company that uses data and science to create effective marketing strategies. Kogan created the app that was used to harvest the Facebook user data. While we don't know exactly what motivated Kogan to orchestrate this attack, Cambridge Analytica has said that their goal with this data was to build detailed profiles on Americans, which their clients can leverage for psychographic targeting of ads. Now, I want to dive into the attack vector that Kogan and Cambridge Analytica used to attack Facebook. There are three main stages of the attack. The first stage is creating the attack. The actual attack was done through an app called This Is Your Digital Life. This app was developed by Kogan and incorporates Facebook's Open Graph API. The Graph API was created in 2010 as a tool for third-party apps and developers. The main concept behind this API was to treat Facebook network as a social graph, with nodes, edges, and fields. In this large graph, pages, groups, posts, photos, and comments are all examples of nodes. Edges between nodes represent connections between said nodes. For example, there might be edges connecting a photo to its comments. Fields are simply properties of nodes and edges. For example, a user node might have fields such as name, email, and birthday. With this tool, developers are able to programmatically access Facebook data, post stories, manage ads, and leverage many other functionalities. Third-party apps were able to integrate Facebook data into themselves and interact with the Facebook network in a seamless manner. The issue with the Graph API, however, was its scope. What is shown here is a table of the permissions that were given through the Graph API. The circled 1s and 2s represent version 1 of the API, which was the version that was used by Kogan, and version 2 of the API, respectively. The personal data that was accessible through the API was not limited to simply just name and birthday. Many more private pieces of information were also accessible: education, political preference, religious affiliation, and much more. In addition to the oversharing of personal information of an individual user, developers also had access to data of that individual's friends. And this indirect access was not limited either. As you can see in the table, the same information was available for the user's friends, their political and religious preferences, their relationship statuses, and so much more. All this information is available if you have the appropriate access tokens. And here's how Kogan was able to get all these access tokens. So the second stage is spreading the attack. Kogan had posted a request on Turkopticon, a website that is used by Amazon Mechanical Turk users. This request asked users to complete a psychological profile survey, claiming that it was for academic use. Participants were reimbursed with $1 to $2 for participating in the survey. Here's the catch. The survey required participants to add an app to their Facebook account. This app, of course, was the This Is Your Digital Life app. Finally, once users accepted the app, it was simply a matter of pulling the personal data through the API. Facebook's application architecture can be summarized in this diagram. When a user is trying to get a new Facebook application, they must authenticate themselves as well as give permissions to the app. This is done by connecting to Facebook servers and pulling the account's access token. Once the access token is given back to the user passes this token on to the application. In the context of this attack, once the malicious app received the access tokens, that is when Kogan was able to fully leverage the Graph API to get access to the users. And because the API gave access to friends as well, the amount of data that was harvested grew exponentially. Kogan would then sell this enormous amount of data to Cambridge Analytica. The consequences of the attack are, in my opinion, what make this attack so significant. Despite being the so-called victim, Facebook were the ones who suffered from the public scrutiny. The consequences can be broken down into 4 domains: political, financial, technical, and social. Many media outlets associate this data breach with 2018. However, that was when the breach was discovered. In fact, the attack vector had been used since the early 2010s to harvest data. And before 2018, this data was used for various political campaigns, namely the 2015 Ted Cruz presidential campaign and the 2016 Trump presidential campaign. Targeting campaign ads were designed to reach specific audiences based on the personal information of the voters. The financial repercussions were mostly experienced by Facebook as well. In terms of company value, the social network's share price fell by 7%, and its market value followed suit, falling more than $36 billion. The company was also investigated by the UK's Information Commissioner's Office and was found to have breached data protection laws. They were then fined £500,000. The technical repercussions can be summed up as changes to the Graph API and Facebook's data privacy policies. The Graph API was actually updated in 2014 to restrict the amount of data that was accessible through the API. However, this update was not enforced retroactively, so programs made before the update were unaffected. So, the first action Facebook took was to investigate all apps made prior to 2014 update. In addition to that, Facebook automatically revoked data access rights for apps that were unused by a Facebook user for more than 3 months. And lastly, in an attempt to be more transparent about data accessibility, tooling was developed to make it clear to users what apps had and did not have access to user data, as well as providing an easy way to revoke data access privileges. And finally, the social consequences of this attack can be summarized as an overall distrust of the Facebook platform from its users. According to an NBC News article, a survey was conducted asking users a variety of questions to get their opinion on this data breach scandal. There are 2 statistics in particular that I found shocking. First, when asked whether Facebook is committed to protecting the privacy of their users' personal information, only about 27% of participants agreed. This is a significant drop from the 79% of participants who agreed in 2017. Secondly, more than 30% of participants said they were likely to decrease their usage of the platform or stop altogether. After learning more about the data breach and the actual attack vector used to orchestrate the breach, I think a real question about all of this is Facebook really the victims? They did give third-party developers, and in turn Kogan, access to private data. In a way, it was almost as if they were a part of the attack as well. That is not to say that Facebook meant for their users' data to be used in the way it did, but it does seem that Facebook may have forgotten a few basic security design principles, and I listed a few here. The first is psychological acceptability, meaning if the UI is not easy to use and understand, then the protection mechanism it is meant to enforce won't be used properly. One of Facebook's responses to the breach was to create tooling to make it more obvious for users what data was being shared. Maybe if they had this tooling before to inform the users of what data was being accessed, then users might have hesitated to accept Kogan's app in the first place. The second is principle of least privilege. The API automatically gave developers access to all users' data after users added an app to their Facebook account. Instead, if developers had to specify what data they would need, it would help users protect their data by making informed decisions, and it would help Facebook with finding potentially malicious third-party apps. Finally, here's some questions for you to consider.